There we go. I know, I was late. I had some issues with the microphone and this gown. This is actually part of a different cosplay, the gown. So yeah, like I said, I don't know if I completely understood the assignment, but I did my best. So, ooh. Thank you. I'm gonna lower this a little bit. So you're more level with my couch. A little better. A couple hours. My hair's 6. A couple hours. Especially like all that. And then I made the mistake of, I went to the chiropractor, peeped the bow that you all gave me. I went to the chiropractor with the face done. And then they were like, your appointment's tomorrow. You don't have an appointment today. And I was like, I left the house looking like this for no reason. And they were like, why do you? And I was like, long story, I have to leave. So and the horns that Swiftfly gave me. Love these horns. Really great. I was like, you know what? If I had painted the horns, I could almost go for like a Homestuck vibe. But I didn't consider that until I had put the outfit together. And then I was like, oh, maybe should have picked a different color gradient to do other than every blue I have. Yeah, dang it. I was like, maybe I could, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I can't do that. The Homestuck people will come for me. They don't like me. We can't do that. Thank you. Blue will match the rest of you. Excellent. I was really worried. I was like, I hope this contact does fine. Because I have to... You know how like most, or at least when I see them, most TikTokers wait until the end to put their contacts in? I can't do that. I have to have them in the entire time I'm doing my face, or I can't see at all. So I was really worried. I was like, I'm going to put this black one in. And by God, and I was like, if it doesn't work out, I'm going to put the Deckham from Death Parade in, because I was like, I'm not going to be able to see. I have to be able to see to be able to do all the stuff. And if the black one doesn't react well, I tried one time to put the black one in after I did makeup and it fucked up half my face. Did I still do the TikTok? Yes, I did. Was I proud of it? No, I was not. But I did. I've had this black one in all day. And strangely enough, not irritating me as much as I thought it would. Takes a bit to get it there. But once I got it in, it was fine. Yeah, I just couldn't But I am really excited because, especially because Crimson's here. Thank you, Crimson. Crimson has pretty much gave me all I need to complete a whole cosplay look that I'm working on. One of the more pricey ones. So thank you. And they put in the memo that it was for contacts. So thank you. And I am getting contacts with it. I'm getting 2 pairs. Both cosplay contacts. One's getting the zombie eyes in my prescription, and the other one is getting Nyarlathotep contacts. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. So thank you very much for making that possible. You've also made it completely possible to finish the entirety of the look that I'm going on. So we're going to have some new stuff churning out, which I'm really excited about. Because I've been sitting on half-fulfilled projects for a while. So really excited about that. Thank you so much, Crimson. And also thank you, Rose, for your donation. That also can buy a pair of contacts, but I'm using it for body paint. Because you just said, because. So, yeah, we're getting body paint. More body paint. This isn't enough body paint, apparently. No, I'm gonna need a lot. I'm gonna pretty much get into this cosplay once, maybe twice, and try and shoot everything I got in one day with this, because, oh boy, it's gonna be an outfit. And most of it's gonna not have clothes. So I'm gonna have to have a whole bunch of body paint to help with that. So that's gonna be a whole thing. So I'm really excited about that, but damn, it's gonna be a project. And also, maybe got me a spine and some scar wax. If you want to see the spine, I left it in the hallway. I can go get it. Who wants to see the spine? I'll have to take this mic off. Yeah, because I assembled it, but I'm also going to disassemble it later because I got to use this stuff. Anyway, hold on. Enjoy perfect silence, and also me annoyingly taking off, me fidgeting with this the entire time. Be right back. Hold up. Spine. Maybe it's so great. I love it. And I'm gonna disassemble it. And then I'm gonna put it on my spine on the outside. I'm gonna have outside spine. I'm gonna have 2 spines. And then I'll never have to go to the chiropractor again. That's not even far off from what it's for. But thank you, maybe, for your donation. I really appreciate it. Also, scar wax. I don't know how to explain this to you any better, but that's going to be used for Dennis and Denzel. We're going to have a Dennis and Denzel. And I'm going to break one of their wrists. So that's going to be used for that. So all super helpful donations for stuff and things I'm trying to do and put together. I figured it would be helpful for you to know where exactly your money and your donations are going to. So yeah. So that way you couldn't feel like you're just throwing your hard-earned money into the void and that I'm not doing anything with it. I am. The donations are still processing, so I'll get those on the 13th, and then I'm going to order the stuff. And you can expect cosplays shortly after, some of which I will be in the live. And thank you so much, because I feel like everyone's going to be mad after this particular live. You're all going to be real mad. So I hope you still, what's the right word here? Enjoy me? I hope you all still enjoy me after this live. Y'all are gonna be so mad. Y'all are gonna be so mad. It's alright. Well, I will say, if you remember when I said not to read ahead? As much as I want to experience this with you, after today's live, if you want to go ahead and read ahead, I'll go ahead and let you do that. That'll be fine if you really want to, because I feel like waiting a week after what we're gonna do today is gonna be upsetting. It's not gonna be great. So I'll completely understand if you want to read ahead after this point. If you want to wait, great, and experience it with all of us and just undergo and just live with it, that's okay too. Aw, Crimson. Oh man, I really hope you like me after this. I appreciate all of your support up to this far. I understand if after this you want to leave. I get it. But I really enjoy our time together, and I'm really glad that you were here for as long as you were. It's been a fun ride. It's been really fun, you guys. And you know, if I see you all here next week, I'll consider it a privilege to continue reading to you all. But I just wanted you to know that y'all might be mad. Y'all might be big mad. And I wanted to forewarn you about that I am going to upset you. And I'm very sorry about that. So, Tony over here writing our eulogy. I am good at them. So, and as you'll see today, it's pretty fitting to have a eulogy. So, do we want to go ahead and get into it, or we want to stall a little bit more? Because I'll stall a little bit more if y'all feel like it. Oh, what have you missed? The eulogy. The eulogy. Everybody get your drinks, get a pet. Especially have a pet today for emotional support, if nothing else. Get a smoothie. I have water over here, but probably by the next chapter I'm gonna have to swap. I have some wine, some smoothie over here. Definitely not anything else. And I might have to swap halfway through this. Depends on how it goes. Now let me find the page, because we're on chapter 13. if you want to know where we're at. And just a short recap. If you've never joined us before and you have no idea what's going on, every week on Tuesday at 8, I read a book. And we're working through the Johannes Cabal series. This is the third in the series. It's called Johannes Cabal and the Fear Institute. If you haven't read the other two, they're up on the YouTube. And the YouTube, happy to say, is up to date with everything up until last week. So you can go enjoy that afterward if you're feeling bummed. And in case you weren't here last week, basically, they almost got sold into slavery if it weren't for Johannes Cabal, who talked them out of it, and they decided to take a different ship to Dilith-Leen. But once they got to Dilith-Leen, those black galley traders were everywhere. And soon they cornered the entire harbor and were going to take it hostage until the moon caught fire. Everybody was just as astounded as everyone else, and Shadrach died. Yes, we'll miss him sorely. And then after that, they encountered some cats in the wilderness who Cord pissed off. A little cat stole some meat and ran off with it. It was just having a snack, as cats do. And he threw a rock and killed it, and the other cats cornered him because no man may kill a cat in Ulthar. And then there were two. And they're making their way to the lair of Hepseth, the wizard, to find the lost island of Mormo so they can find the phobic animus and destroy the physical manifestation of fear. So now that we're all caught up, we're going to go ahead and dive right in. And like I said, chapter 13, if you want to know the page number, it is 244. In my book, may be different in yours. In which the domestic wants of sorcerers are investigated, and Cabal cannot be concerned. Can you hear me? Oh, my mic's still over here. I didn't pick it up. Can you all hear me? God. I just left my microphone over here like a dumbass. Let me put that back up here. Can you hear me better? Could you hear me better on the couch? I don't know. Did you all get the recap? Do I need to redo it? I'll redo it. That was my fault. The mic is a bait. Did you all get the recap? Should I redo it? I'll redo it. The book. We heard you. We heard it. Okay. Cool. I'm sorry I left my mic over there. I didn't even think about it. I was just really excited about spines. You know how I get. Guys. Okay. Let's go. Much as a rubber ball deforms on impact, only to spring back into its usual shape, so Bosey's crumpled spirit soon rose above such small distractions as having two friends die in relatively rapid succession and in the most horrible ways. After all, life goes on. Which, in the case of Gardner Bosey, meant strolling along, whistling a jaunty tune, and generally exhibiting a guileless, indeed witless mind. On a village street, it would be acceptable. In the dun dunes of Alkali Cupernombo Desert, it was a little wearing. At least it was not especially hot. The lack of water in the desert was more an accident of geography than extreme temperatures, and while it was a long way from cool, it was not unbearable. Of the environmental hardships, Bosey's whistling was by far the worst. It came slightly muted, although not nearly enough, by the handkerchief he had tied over his mouth and nose in imitation of Johannes Cabal, a measure to avoid breathing in more than was necessary. Cabal's second innovation of wearing his baffled blue-lensed sunglasses Bosey could not emulate, so he was reduced to squinting fiercely at the fine dusty clouds that blew up into dust devils, giving the excuse of any faint breeze. At least Cabal would not have to endure Bosey's whistling for long, as this leg of their journey would be a short one. According to Cabal's maps and notes, the abandoned city lay a day's walk into the sands and was easily visible at range, so an error in navigation was unlikely. When the distant towers of ancient Golthoth appeared, only slightly off their set course, they were only as tired as a day's walking on sand would warrant, and since the sun didn't seem greatly interested in the Kubarnombo, barely dehydrated at all. Golthoth was a very different city from the one they had left by the Lake of Yath, where that had been strangely vibrant, as if all the citizenry were just hiding out of sight and awaiting to leap out in an impracticably large game of peekaboo. Golthoth seemed to have been built as a mysterious, abandoned city right from the first stroke of an architect's stylus. As Bosie commented when they first walked into its broad precincts, the place seemed very redolent of ancient Egypt, calling to mind the Memphis of the early dynastic period. Was it perhaps possible, he wondered, that the dreams of the first pharaohs had influenced this place? Cabal was quite certain it was the other way around. The city contained a great deal of formal statuary, made from a dense stone of less scatological shades of brown than the desert. Gods and rulers they may once have been, but 1,000 generations of sandstorms had eroded their faces into little more than arrays of suggestive bumps and contours that seemed to indicate that few had begun with human physiognomies. Cabal also noticed that the doorways were uniformly a good 20 inches taller than normal earthly doors, and that the more important buildings often seemed to sport additional doors of a curious, squat, hexagonal design, some larger examples lacking the upper edge to become pentagonal instead. Cabal kept his counsel, but suspected that these buildings had witnessed visitors for whom the strange doors were ideally suited. The architectural style, however, was not homogeneous. Here and there, later additions stood awkwardly surrounded by the eldritch opulence of the original buildings. Some seemed to have been built in an attempt to claim the city for some interloping power, a strategy that had only ever been met by failure, judging from the current state of affairs. Other, rarer forms were more enigmatic. These were unique towers dotted randomly about the place as if they had been dropped from space, or had grown up through the pavements and squares. There were not many. Cabal counted 5 easily visible, with 2 or 3 more tumbled and broken. The brown sand-grown yards deepened drifts against the shattered stone. "Wizards," he said disparagingly. "The pretentious bastards just have to set up shop in towers situated in awkward places. It is a fault endemic among them." "And this wizard Yerkusides mentioned, Hepseth." "Yes, Hepseth. One of these will be his, then, Mr. Cabal?" Bosie allowed something like worry to travel across his beamish face. "I say, though, it's all a bit dead here, isn't it? Do you think he's still about?" Cabal considered opening his bag to double-check with Yerkusides, but decided against it. The hermit-cum paperweight had become recalcitrant and stilleth-lean, and every time Cabal tried to speak to him, their conversations became shorter and more cryptic, to the point at which he simply did not care to try any more. "He should be," he said, but did not sound very reassured, even to himself. The city felt dead to him, and he was better equipped than most to sense such a state. He just hoped that it would not be necessary to revivify any more skulls, although the thought of Yerkusides and Hepseth being stuck in the same Gladstone and resenting it deeply cheered him up a little. "It must be one of these towers. We shall work through them until we find the right one." Fortunately, the pretentious nature of wizards in general, and the sort who raise obtrusive towers in other people's cities, without so much as a by your leave or planning permission in particular, worked in Cabal's favor. The first tower they approached was all basalt blades jutting into the air on the topmost reaches, with sinuous forms of all black marble disporting themselves around the door. It was quite evident why this particular Magus had gotten into the job in the first place. Over the door was carved a sphinx, couchant, and when they were approached, she turned her face to them and said, Whosoever wishes to meet with Calon of Serpes, the sage of the Amber Star, must first answer me 3 riddles. Calon of Serpes, repeated Cabal. Wrong house. Good day, madam. Wait a moment, demanded the Sphinx. I've been laying here all couchant for 300 years, waiting to ask somebody my riddles. Then your wait isn't over. Good day, he repeated, a little firmly, and walked away, the Sphinx enraged shouting, fading in the sigh of the desert wind behind them. Bosie looked at him, eyes wide with fright. The door spoke to us, he managed eventually. Strictly the door frame spoke to us, but yes, now our next port of call. The next tower was oddly proportioned in a way that would appeal to a student of Freud, and Cabal didn't have to make many guesses as to this Magus's inner motivations either. Fortunately, his name was on a sand-scoured brass plate upon an iron door, ancient but readable, and they were able to exclude it from their enquiries and move on. The third tower belonged to Querceton the Destroyer, at least according to the animated stone dog that guarded the place, a glistening spire of woven glass and crystal. Then the dog attacked them, but it was only constructed from common sandstone, and the desert storms had blasted it thin, so a well-placed kick decapitated it. It charged at Cabal, or where Cabal had been a moment before, and so completed its destruction by running into a wall and reducing itself to aggregate. The fourth tower was as black as ebon night, and encouragingly bore the inscription, Hepseth, over the doorway in Lorphic hieroglyphs that Cabal was able to enunciate with dismissive ease. Less encouragingly, the door stood open, swinging slightly in the low, endless desert wind. Perhaps he has an open-door policy, said Bosie with optimism verging on delusion. Yes, of course, that will be it, said Cabal as he eased the door a little further open with his foot. He raised a tower in this distant, damned place, wringing the very matter from it from the footnotes between quanta, and then he left the door ajar, because he's so very sociable, really. In the low afternoon sun, the ground floor room of the tower could be seen to be several inches deep in fine sand. And he sacked his cleaner. He looked at Bosie, but the little man was obviously trying to reconcile all these facts into a whole. Cabal sighed. Sarcasm, Bosie. It was sarcasm. I'll hold up a sign next time, he added, but as he wasn't holding up a sign at that time, Bosie believed him and nodded with a grateful smile. They tracked cautiously through the entry hall, but if it had ever contained any defenses, magical or mechanical, they had long since manifested or sprung. Round the curved walls at a stolid staircase of the same black stone that rose in a clockwise spiral, much like that of a lighthouse. Up this stair Johannes Cabal slowly climbed, followed at a judicious distance by the pallid Bose. The first floor consisted of an antechamber of sorts, the stair next to the next floor being behind an elegant but sturdy door of suggestively molten forms, all rendered once more in the smooth, glossy black stone. Fortunately, it was not locked, and they were able to climb further upwards to what seemed to be an audience chamber or even a throne room. They never lack for egos, do they? Said Cabal as they moved up to the third floor. This was the living quarters, informed with the decadent luxuriance so common among top-end wizards. There was a bathing chamber beside the bedroom that contained a great sunken bath, and beyond that a discreet privy whose drainage plumbing appeared to be a trans-dimensional interface of some sort. Presumably waste is thereby conducted to some distant place where raining excrement is not regarded as unusual. Like Tartarus, he guessed, or Ipswich. Cabal had already made some rough guesses as to the dimensions of the rooms, and he could not help but notice that they were growing steadily larger. Unlike the external dimensions, which apparently tapered to a small lookout on the highest floor, apparently playing Mary Hob with dimensions had been Hepseth's major stock in trade, and based on this conjecture, he had already made a guess as to what the next floor would reveal. Neither was he incorrect, as they climbed up into Hepseth's laboratory. It was a large room, some 100 feet in diameter, windowless, yet illuminated by good, unwavering lights that seemed simply to emanate from the air close to the ceiling. In the center of the chamber was an iron spiral staircase that seemed likely to re-enter the normal dimensions of the exterior at its peak and open into the small lookout deck. Cabal walked a few yards into the laboratory and looked around, uncertain what he should be searching for. Looking back, however, he spotted Bosey's head from the nose up, just peeping out of the stairwell. "Is it safe?" asked Bosey, a waver in his voice. "That I cannot say. If you specifically mean, is there an ancient sorcerer up here who's outraged by our intrusion and means us harm, the answer is no. Neither is there a body. The signs are that the tower is abandoned, just like the rest of the city. Hepseth either didn't need this place anymore, or died elsewhere and never returned. I cannot say which." He grunted irritably. "Do come out from there, Bosey. I feel like I'm talking to a mole." As Bosey crept up the remaining steps like a man entering a maiden aunt's sick room, Cabal turned his professional eye upon Hepseth's arcane paraphernalia. He was inwardly disturbed by how little of it he could recognize. There were several things whose function he couldn't even guess at, and his ignorance chafed at him. Nor were they even comfortable to examine visually, their edges, angles, and vertices behaving in ways so strange and ill-mannered that Euclid would have been brought to tears. "This is the work of a man who is obsessed with reaching the island of Mormo," he said, half to himself, this being the half from which he expected a sensible conversation. "Eh?" said Bosey, the half from which Cabal expected nothing, so he ignored him. "A genius, judging by his work here, a genius of dimensional engineering. If he wants to go somewhere, he doesn't call a taxi. He wants to go somewhere and no one can go, because nobody knows where it is. And he speaks of He had been turning slowly as he talked, his eyes sweeping around the room, and now he stopped and stared. "A 7-sided gate." "Yes, he did," agreed Bosey, standing by a structure that, to the unjaundiced eye, looked a great deal like an asymmetric 7-sided gateway, standing by itself some 20 feet from the nearest wall. It was made from thin, lathe-like girders of a brass-like metal that was not brass, but a strange alloy that Cabal had encountered once before in unenjoyable circumstances. "That's what your head in the bag said anyway, but what does it mean?" Cabal walked over to him, grasped him firmly by the back of his collar, and twisted him to look at the structure. "Count," he commanded. "One," squeaked Bosey. "What's gotten into you, Mr. Cabal? There's one frame sort of thing. Should there be more?" Cabal gave up and let him go, while he himself stepped away to weigh up at the next move. The gateway was as ambivalent to reality as anything else in the room, seeming to change form within flashes of perception, as if unable to decide whether to be two faces talking or a vase. In this case, however, the choice was between being one asymmetric 7-sided gateway and being any of a vast number of similar but different 7-sided gateways. Looking upon it for even a minute was very uncomfortable, as if the intellect was firmly and methodically unplugging and replugging the cables on the switchboard of the mind into new and ontologically challenging configurations. With difficulty, Cabal managed to look away from it, and instead found himself gazing at the cheerfully gormless face of Bosey, thereby going from the sublime to the ridiculous. The work of creating the necessary gate of dubious physicality within the gateway built for it was not going to be a sudden great revelation any time in the next few minutes, so Bosie repaired to the sorcerer's bedchamber to snore gently upon gray-silver samite sheets miraculously untouched by the passage of time, another boon of the tower's curious reality. Cabal, meanwhile, settled down in the laboratory with what writings of the great man he could find and started sorting them into piles of graduated usefulness. Even for a man of Cabal's voracious intellect, this proved difficult. He was a long way from his specialties, and his problems were compounded by the growing realization that Hepseth was not only a leading light in his field, but he was the only light. His notes used forms and nomenclature that were unique to him because he had originated this whole thaumaturgical subset of theory, so Cabal not only had to evaluate the notes, but he also had to learn a new and novel lexicon in which to do it. Muttering sourly to himself, he began to pore over the papers in the full knowledge that he might be days or weeks about it. Happily, they discovered a large store of fresh food that was as fresh as the day the fruit had been plucked or the animal slaughtered. It was another of Hepseth's innovations, like the privy, applying the extraordinary to the mundane. Neither had he overlooked a seemingly boundless supply of fresh, cool water. They would not starve here, at least. The next morning, the room's mysterious lighting, helpfully waxed and waned to give a sense of the time of day outside, found Cabal surrounded by notes and his own writing and possessed of a grudging admiration for Hepseth, albeit one overmatched by a solid dislike of the man based on his inability to write a glossary of terminology and leave it out where some passing necromancer might find it. That he himself wrote notes in a dead language and then enciphered them did not strike him as blindingly hypocritical. He could be executed for necromancy, whereas somebody who could create such magical conveniences as instantaneous travel, perfect food preservation, and unblockable toilets had very little to fear, except being mobbed by a loving population. Bosie came in, the very epitome of ebullience in rapid succession, wished Cabal a good morning, asked him if he'd cracked the secret of turning the gateway on yet, and even as Cabal was looking for something heavy and spiky to throw at his head, patted it for purposes of illustration, thereby activating it. Cabal froze, a heavy, spiky thing in his drawn-back throwing arm, and gawped at the shimmering portal that had appeared as easily and without fuss as blowing a soap bubble. The heavy, spiky thing fell from his hand to heavily spike the floor. How? He seemed momentarily incapable of forming the simplest sentence. Gateway. How? How? He leaped to his feet and the laboratory stool of Hepseth clattering over behind him. How in the 9 circles of hell did you manage to conjure the gateway, you dim-witted buffoon? He roared, forgetting both diplomacy and some much more cutting insults in his passion. On the other hand, it would have been wasted effort. Bosie's ability to misunderstand, and generally remain unscratched by the most jagged verbal barbs transcended the usual simile of water off a duck's back. In comparison to his happy indifference to insult, a duck was made of sponge with blotting paper feathers. "I just tapped it, old man," said Bosie. "Hadn't you tried tapping it yet?" "Look at this," demanded Cabal, gesturing at the dozens of closely written sheets arranged into neat piles upon the table. "Look at all this. This is just basic theory. The very least I would need to understand before going on to intermediate theory, then advanced theory, and finally the extreme edges of theory where Hepseth was working before I could even think of touching that damnable thing. No, just tapping it was weeks away. He swallowed and took several deep breaths. Get your things together. We don't know how long the gateway will remain open. Bosie opened his mouth to say something, but Cabal interrupted him. If you were about to say that if it closes before we're ready, you can just tap it again, don't. It would be more than your life's worth at present. They had few belongings by this point, in any event. The few knickknacks that Bosie had collected being abandoned aboard the Audain, while Cabal kept all he needed, and several things he might, in his Gladstone. It was the work of a moment to find something similar to a carpet-bag in Hepseth's wardrobe. He was, it seemed, especially given to very high collars and wide sleeves, judging by its other contents, and to load it with food, water, and wineskins. Then they stood before the coruscating light contained within the shifting heptagonal gateway and paused a second. Cabal could not help but be reminded of a similar occasion. Weeks before, when they stood before a similar gateway in the Arkham garret, and just look at how that had turned out. Then they had been hounded by a ghoul pack, and time had been pressing. Now the only pressure upon them was the possibility of the gateway closing, and that did not seem quite so urgent. Cabal had a sense that if he went through that wavering sheet of distorted reality, things would change. Hugely, radically, in ways he could not predict. It was an irrational feeling, and normally he would have crushed it easily, but in that place it circled inside his mind, making his neck tense and uncomfortable, and he knew the phobic animus was at work again. He considered briefly whether he should allow Bosie to go first, or give him a firm shove into the portal should he demur. It would be pointless, however. There was no easy way to tell if disparition was disintegration followed by a distant reintegration, or just disintegration followed by nothing at all. Besides which, the odd, ill-formed conviction of change that flittered around his mental battlements like translucent sheeted ghosts assured him that the change would not simply be one of being alive to being dead. So he took a deep breath in through the mouth and let it run through his nose, and stepped into the gateway. Probably. It was a lot less pleasant than travel via a discorporated poet. Cabal had a momentary sense that he had turned to very fine sand, and that the sand was falling away from him. He especially resented it when his eyes flowed away from him like pollen in a breeze, but a moment later the rest of his skull followed, and it subsequently became difficult to resent anything very much. He did wonder distantly if this was the nature of the change he had intuited, and that he would spend the rest of eternity as a cloud of minutely powdered necromancer, wafting around the cosmos and unable to get very concerned about anything anymore. He felt he should be concerned that he couldn't be concerned, but he couldn't be concerned enough to care, so he wasn't. No, that's paint. Stop it. Please. You gotta, respect the time. Ow. Ow. You're hurting. Ow. Ow. Pond, calm down. Lay over there. Lay over there like you did last week. Be good. Be good. Come on. Lay over here. Sorry. Pond is increasingly upset. There we go. Okay. That's fine. That's fine. You can stay there. Where was I? He felt he should be concerned that he couldn't be concerned, but he couldn't be concerned enough to care, so he wasn't. A Jovian perspective, to be sure, but one hard to become enthusiastic about if the job didn't come with thunderbolts. But then he considered enthusiasm, and found his own memories of it drained of color, dimensions, and veracity, like a badly written strip cartoon in a cheap newspaper. Falling apart had been so easy. Mildly disconcerting to begin with, but one got used to one's molecules going their separate ways, and then the atoms within those molecules trailing off by themselves, and then the electrons and neurons, and the strangeness and charm, and down ad infinitum in far less time than it takes to say ad infinitum. Coming back together, on the other hand, hurt like blazes. There was sun, and there was sand, and there was a screaming, burning man being reforged from the stuff of creation, and he was not enjoying it in the slightest. It would have been a boon if his nervous system had reformed a little later in the process than it did, but that's magic for you. Even when it's helpful, it finds a way to be surly with it. Thus, his nerves were in place to tell him just how shatteringly painful it is to be glued back together from cosmic clay and fairy dust. The only positives about the experience was that it was educational. Being reconstructed is precisely this painful, and it was short. Johannes Cabal flopped onto the beach, eyes wide, with still vibrant memories of recent agony, and rolled onto his back. His hands clenched tightly enough for his fingernails to draw blood from his palms, his face in a humorless, rictal grin. He had no idea how long he lay there, the sound of the waves breaking as ignored as the azure sky. His eyes saw but did not comprehend. Then he blinked, and sense began to return to him. "Gosh!" said a familiar voice. "That stung a bit, didn't it?" Cabal sat up. He was on a beach, a beautiful beach of golden sand beneath a golden sun, and it would have been idyllic, but not for the presence of Bosie, sitting on a nearby rock, a man with the ability to render the greatest wonders prosaic by his mere presence. Reaction to the translocation set in a moment later. Cabal leaned over and vomited upon the golden sand, which was not improved by the addition. When he had finished bringing everything up, he felt febrile, weak, and oddly ashamed, so he scooped over the sand over the vomit to hide it. He fumbled in his pocket to find his blue-lensed sunglasses and put them on to conceal his reddened, watering eyes and save them from the strong sunshine. "It stung a bit," he managed to say. "How are you so composed, Bosie? That was the single most unpleasant physical experience I have ever suffered, and I've had some bad ones, believe you me." Bosie shrugged. "Yes, it was rather horrid, wasn't it? But I was here for a full hour before your arrival, Mr. Cabal. I've had a chance to get over it." "Where were you?" "Where was I?" Cabal rose shakily to his feet and dusted himself off. "Neither here nor there, it seems." He looked around. The beach stretched for about a mile in either direction before vanishing in the curve of the coastline. It gave way to palm trees and thicker vegetation as it rose up sharply towards a great rocky crag that formed the center of the island. Assuming it was an island and not some promontory on a larger landmass, directly between them and this feature, however, there was no forest at all, but only a hill of bare rock into which a crude, zigzagging path had been carved. At its head, some 500 yards up the rock face, was an equally primitive great stone face, cut from the living rock, a demoniacal countenance with a cave entrance for a mouth, befanged, behorned, and terrible in its cliches. Cabal had seen a few scary cave entrances in his time, and this one scored low points for originality. "This is Mormo, I presume," he said, semi-rhetorically, as he expected little insight from Bosie. "I would hate to have to enter some hideous cave of secrets and face whatever terrors it contains, and then for it to turn out to be the wrong one." Bosie shook his head. "Can't say, old boy, but unless you plan to make a boat or just settle down here, I don't suppose we have much choice but to investigate it." "No," admitted Cabal, "I don't suppose we do." The day was still young, and Cabal felt enervated by the trip and empty by its effects, so they took a little time to eat slowly some of the food they had brought with them, and regarded the cave mouth frequently with guarded suspicion as they did so, just in case the phobic animus came galumphing out to share their meal, and then, in recompense, kill or unhinge them with a torrent of pure fear. It did not, but the possibility that it might took away most of the small pleasure to be had from eating outside. It was, however, an eminently suitable time to reflect on how far they had come, and the travails they had undergone to be on that beach, or just to look at the sea and say how pretty it was, which sufficed for Bosey. Cabal ignored him, a skill it had taken little effort to bring to a high finish. For his own part, the forebodings he had experienced within the Tower of Hepseth now doubled, in not a change that he would care for. He was inevitably reminded that the 13th card of the tarot deck, Death, signified sudden change that was usually only a figurative death, usually but not always. That uncertainty between the metaphorical and the actual had never concerned him quite so much before. Death was waiting for him here. If he had drawn a card at random from a tarot deck right that moment, he would have been more surprised if it had been any one of the 77 others. The sense was not rational, so we could not analyze it rationally. It was subjective to the final degree, so the only metric for it was previous experience. Was the sense imposed, or was its genesis within him? He could not tell. It might just as easily be the influence of the phobic animus, demonstrating that it had subtleties beyond mortal terror. Cabal drew a long draught from his water skin and replaced the stopper, with an awareness that this might be among his last acts. "Come along, Herr Bosey," he said as he stood and beat the sand from his seat. "Our destinies, or something along those lines, await." The climb up the pathway did not take nearly long enough, and almost before they knew it, they were standing in the mouth of the great stone head. The daylight did not extend very deeply inside, and from what they could see, the interior was not a natural cave, but had been cut from the stone of the hill. Bosey squinted into the darkness. "I can't say I fancy going in there, Mr. Cabal. It's awfully gloomy. We shan't be able to see our hands in front of our faces. I suppose we could try and make flambeaux." He looked round and found a bit of dry wood, presumably carried up into the cave during a fierce storm in some bygone year. "If we find another stick like this and wrap something around it that we can set fire to—" Cabal said nothing, but took the stick from Bosey and opened his bag. Instantly, cool, green-blue flames licked up from inside. Cabal took out the eternally burning head of Arcusides and stuck it on the end of the stick. "There," he said, Cabal. "That will do nicely." "Eh?" said Arcusides. "Is somebody there? What's going on?" "You're earning your keep, sir," said Cabal. "Now quiet, please. We're working." The cave extended back some 20 feet before narrowing into a stone gullet ridged with shallow steps that descended at an angle of some 30 degrees to the horizontal. Cabal walked down them without hesitation. If he was correct about the nature of the place, it would not require traps to protect its treasure, as its treasure was quite capable of defending itself. The gullet opened out into a jagged gallery, this time a natural formation that had been tweaked here and there, but was otherwise as natural processes had created it. Along one side of a crevice in the floor wound as they walked alongside it, becoming first a crevasse and then something like an abyss by the time they were close to the far end of the gallery, some 200 feet long. The light from Arcusides' skull burned brightly and reflected from the semi-precious stones and quartzes that sparkled the walls. Cabal paused, looking first up a short ramp that led into an Another narrow carved corridor, much like the gullet from the entry, and then he looked into the abyss. Dank humors were carried up by a low wind that groaned on the very edge of hearing. Bosie cautiously joined him. "What do you suppose is down there?" he asked, curiosity and trepidation mingling in his voice. "I'm guessing at two things. One is a supposition, the other a good likelihood. First, I think whatever is left of the wizard Hepseth is down there, if he's lucky. The gods played a childish game with him, and they usually throw away what they tire of." "Really?" Bosie's voice was a squeak. He sidled a little closer to the edge and looked over into the shadow deep. "And the other?" The powerful shove he received in his back from Johannes Cabal took him clear off the precipice, and then he screamed shrilly enough to remove any chance of him hearing Cabal say, "You, any minute now." Cabal listened to the diminuendo screaming for a few seconds, but he heard similar before and was unimpressed by this new rendition. He was making a calculated guess here, and if he was wrong, he was certainly in no more trouble than if he was right. Holding up the grumbling head of Arcusides on a stick, he went down the last corridor and into the chamber of the phobic animus. Surviving fragments of Cyril W. Clone's manuscript for the Young Person's Guide to Cthulhu and His Friends. Number 4, Yog-Sothoth, the Lurker at the Threshold. Yog-Sothoth is never late for appointments, best beloved, for he, the most wonderful of reasons, Yog-Sothoth is coterminous with all time and all space, which means that clever old outer god exists everywhere, all the time. It is so terribly, terribly bright that even it doesn't understand what it's thinking about half the time, but luckily it's aware of the other half of the time, all the time, so it can crib off itself. I don't think that counts as cheating. Yog-Sothoth, who has lots of other names like the Lurker at the Threshold, the Key and the Gate, the Opener of the Way, the All-in-One, and the One and All, the Yog-Sothoth looks like a big crowd of silvery bubbles, but unlike a big crowd of silvery bubbles, it's stupendous in its malign suggestiveness. That's just another way of saying, I'm really not sure I trust those silvery bubbles. And that's the end of chapter 13. And we're on page 264 for whoever wants to know. Good pond. I didn't plug in my phone. It's just hanging out. I'm so glad it didn't die. I should plug it in. The cord is in there, but I didn't. All right. I like that he just keeps your Arcusides. He's just like, you're coming home with me. Good pond. Who interrupted the live? She just burst through the door to climb on my face. Good kitten. Oh yeah. For sure. Thank you for the finger hearts. I appreciate them. So how are you all feeling? That chapter I didn't really think was going to be a problem. It's the next one I feel like y'all are really going to not super be happy with me about. Every demon needs a pond. Aw, good pond. Pond's a demon too. She's just really lazy about it. Good pond. You're excited? Oh, jeez. I've kind of been dreading it, in all honesty, because I knew where the break was. And, I just feel like someone's going to be real upset because of the way it worked out. So, everybody strap in, guys. It's going to be a fun time. It's going to be a fun day. Yep. You want to go in my sleeve? It's a big old sleeve. I bet you can fit in here. Shaboop. Doesn't care. Aw, that's so nice. Tell her I appreciate it. Aw, it's so nice. I can hunt for myself, but it's nice. It's nice that you're trying to take care of me. It's real cool of you. Aw. She's trying. I appreciate it. She's trying. Pond, I don't think has the energy to hunt for anybody. Do you, Pond? Too lazy. Too lazy. Pond only kills bugs if they really annoy her and they're right in front of her. Otherwise, she'll just leave. The only way she'd kill anything is if she was trapped in a room with it and she couldn't escape and it was annoying the piss out of her. That would be the only reason. Secret sleeve cat. It's a big old sleeve. Can fit the whole cat in here. Yeah, get in there. Yeah. Yeah. The sleeve better? You didn't like that one? The sleeve. It fits more uniformly because it's on the right hand and you're facing right. Yeah, it's like a pillow. Good kitten. Yeah, she's very confused why the bugs aren't being accepted. Aw, tell her I do accept them. Oh, that's so sweet. I have other people's cats hunting for me now. You hear that, Pond? I'm not the alpha dog anymore. Well, you're not a dog at all, but you get what I mean. Is that comfortable for you? It's so strange that you're not struggling. Just sort of chilling in here. I kind of thought you'd struggle. Now I gotta lean a certain way because she leaned over and she put her head like right in the crook of my elbow and that is right up the sleeve. And now I gotta lay like a weirdo. Oh, it's gonna hurt my back, Pond. I can't lay like this forever. Oh. I tried to move my arms and then she just added a paw to it and pushed it back down. I guess she likes the sleeve. Super weird, but okay. Here, can I escape? Please? Thank you. Are you gonna stay in here the entire time? You gonna be a good cat? Not get up and not headbutt my ring light and not try and eat my hair? Really would appreciate that. That'd be really cool of you. So, hopefully y'all are doing okay. How did you like that chapter? Update me. How are we doing? How's everyone feeling? Thank you for the roses. I appreciate that. Great. Okay, good. I'm still on good terms. I still have a shot. You not tried tapping it? No! Tapping it was weeks away. Yay! Kids in the chat, everybody get your kids, everybody get your pets, whatever provides you emotional support, get it before we start this next chapter. I have a certain amount of anxiety over reading you this next chapter, in particular. I didn't design it this way. It's just the way it ended up. And, you know, I feel like some people are gonna be mad. But I have a schedule and I can't break schedule anymore. I can't set up a pattern. And if we don't stick to the pattern, do you know? Do you? Did you read ahead? Do you know because you read ahead? Dad, we know you know. You've already read all of them. My concern is not even the content. The thing is that will mess me up and I will not remember that we did that. I have to remember. It's fine. Oh, my foot. Maybe, did you read ahead? Maybe read ahead. But whoever doesn't read ahead is probably going to be mad. Probably going to be mad. Well, because, okay, the thing is that I'm not even entirely worried about the content. I'm worried about the way that I have structured it up until this point. It didn't occur to me that this was going to be a problem until right now. Until literally we started this and I was blocking out the chapter system exactly like we do with all the other ones, 2 a night. Yeah, sort of. It's something. It's a thing. It's a thing that happens. You'll see. Who wants to start? Do we want to start? Do we want to start? Because I have a lot of anxiety over it, and I always like to get things over with when I have anxiety. No, it does not. It does not split mid-sentence. I will tell you that. All right. All right. Chapter 14. Oh, thank you for the rose. Chapter 14, in which we contemplate the life and death of Johannes Cabal. As Johannes Cabal descended, he could see a flickering glow ahead and realized he was approaching the final chamber. Once the glow was strong enough, he popped Arcusides off the end of the stick and put him away. Cabal had a strong presentiment that what was coming was going to be complicated and fraught enough without having to worry about a dead head on a stick. He drew his sword on a small chance that it was possible simply to jump on the epitome of fear and do it to death with some fevered stabbing. It was a very small chance, he knew, but at least to prop his resolve. He considered turning around and going back out into the daylight. The silver key was useless without a gateway, so he could not escape via that route. Perhaps it would be possible to put together some sort of raft, given time, although the chances of negotiating the Serenarian Sea without knowing where he was, and with all the terrors, both meteorological and biological, he might encounter en route, were vanishingly small. Or, he supposed, he could just sit around like Robinson Crusoe. No, he concluded, he would go mad with intellectual frustration before many years had gone by, and end up more like Ben Gunn. No matter what its nature, its likely brevity, or its outcome, he must ultimately endure this encounter, so we might as well get it out of the way now. The descending corridor reached its end, and Cabal stepped through into the chamber beyond. It was not hugely impressive, but given its occupant, it did not need to be. The chamber was circular and some 50 feet in diameter. The walls rose some 10 or 12 feet and then formed a hemispherical dome above. In sconces, spaced some 10 feet apart around the walls, torches burned with a strange red fire that flickered black in its heart, yet cast a soft yellow light. Opposite the entrance, upon a low dais, stood a simple throne of gray and red stone, and upon the throne sat the phobic animus in all its preternatural glory. "Hello, Herr Bosie," said Cabal. "Hello, old man," said Bosie, as cheerfully as ever, but with a distinct underpining of smugness. "I gather you caught on to my little joke. Or did you just kill me because you finally got sick of the sight of me?" His expression shifted to Bosie's habitual sheep-like foolishness. "Oh, I say, Yaroo!" He relaxed again. "If that's the case, you have far more patience than your reputation suggests." "The former is the case, which was the main reason the latter did not occur until this late juncture," replied Cabal. "It was a small thing, as is usually the way. It occurred to me far too recently that you knew I had cursed even the pets of the spider-ant baby creatures of the dark wood, and yet you were in the dead faint when I had done so. At Dillith Lean you knew Shadrach's fate, even though you were in a fetal ball facing the other way at the time. A neat trick for a man. Then, even as you were committing this faux pas, your eyes were dry, and it occurred to me, just in passing, although the idea grew on me, that you had not been sobbing in fear at all. You were laughing." "Yes, well," Bosie shrugged, "it was funny." "The form that you have taken does you no favors. It is impatient and willful. I feared I had gained the attention of Nyarlathotep by all ill-considered incantation in the dark wood, but my apprehension was a misapprehension. Nyarlathotep had taken notice of me well before then. When I realized that, it calmed me a little." "Did it?" Bosie was frankly surprised. "Did it indeed?" "It did, because at least it meant I had not drawn down such misfortune upon my head. It was happenstance. The difference between being struck by lightning in a street on a mountaintop during a storm while capering around with a silver wand." "That's a pretty illusion," said Bosie. "I like that one." "The slip in time and space you had put us into such peril in the first place was both calculated and impatient. At first I thought we were the objects of scrutiny for some dark wizard or another. The dreamlands are rotten with wand wavers, and I stuck by that thesis despite hints to the contrary." "Oh, I know where this is going." Dillith Lean, however, was blatant. "No wizard holds that kind of power to reduce the lunar cities and the moon things to make the moon burn. That was fun, heavy-handed." Bosie wrinkled his nose. "That didn't stop it being fun." "I must admit I'm disappointed. I thought there might be some grand design behind all this, but it seems I was mistaken. As gods go, you're just a brat." Bosie's complacency did not slip, but he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I am called the Crawling Chaos, the god with 1,000 faces. But that is just a simple number for simple minds who like simple. I do not employ Mr. Gardner Bosie often, and when I do, My sensibilities are filtered through his, just as with all my masks. I'm reasonably sure that you're patronizing me. Oh, Mr. Cabal, there has never been a human born, nor shall there ever be, to whom I do not have to talk down. You are all infants in a planetary nursery. Your lives are far too short for you ever to grow up. My point is that it doesn't matter what you think of me, because you don't matter so very much yourself. You have some small use, and you are already fulfilling it. I shan't explain it for reasons that must be terribly obvious even for a stunted intellect like yours. Cabal said nothing. He was not insulted, for the sting of an insult comes from the resentment the insultee feels toward the insulter's relatively weak position of superiority that nurtures a sense of, how dare they, when a god of unimaginable power and intelligence that quite surpasses even the theoretical limits of the human mind calls one a bit dim. However, one has to admit that, relatively speaking, they have a point. Instead, he said, I have some small understanding of what you have in mind. Satan himself regards me as an agent of evil and chaos in the world. Satan, said Bosie. Oh, yes, Satan. Let me ask you something about that. How do you suppose that both Satan and I can exist in the same universe, I mean to say, I don't regard myself as anything so bland as an agent of evil and chaos. I have a job to do, however, and what you call chaos and evil are the usual collateral results. Actually, going out of one's way to create them, though, a tad immature, wouldn't you say? Unless... What are you suggesting? Said Cabal. But he already knew, and so did Bosie. Here's a little thought experiment. What if, when you met Satan, you actually met me in one of my many forms? It would be irrelevant, replied Cabal. No matter what your form, you're an unmitigated bastard. I don't care if you're Satan in your spare time. But Bosie was not listening. And what if there was no God, except as a fictional counterweight to my Satan, Just think of all those people, bowing and scraping to a deity that I made up in my lunchtime, hoping their groveling will get them to some ill-defined heaven, whereas everybody actually ends up in hell. You forget, I have been to hell. Not all of the dead can be found there. Well, maybe there is more than one hell. Or perhaps the ones who would have got to heaven if it wasn't fictional, I just allowed to blink out at death. That would be quite merciful of me, wouldn't it? They die an atheist death, but that's better than going to hell, probably. I wouldn't know. Whenever I die, I get over it after a while. When I was Tezcatlipoca one time, the locals murdered me. I'm not sure why. Underdeveloped senses of humor would be my guess. Anyway, my corpse stank the place out and everybody else choked on the stench and died, which was pretty witty of me, wouldn't you say? You require my validation? Then no, it wasn't very witty. Ironic, I grant you, but witty, no. Suit yourself, said Bosie, unabashed. The Aztecs thought it was very droll, the ones who didn't die, obviously. Anyway, where was I? You were congratulating yourself on your mordant wit? So I was. Just think on it, though. Every religion in the world, major or minor, worshipping things that don't exist, and the unbelievers being all smug about it, and saying that religions are products of human fear and ignorance and inadequacy, all unaware that they're actually products of some minor, mystical jiggery-pokery by yours sincerely, so both the believers and the unbelievers are wrong. Now, come on, you must find that just a little bit funny, surely? What are the ones who worship you? Worship me? As me, oh, they're just a handful, and they tend to end up dead or insane or whatever, and in any case, I don't care, I don't need followers. If they want to grovel to me, it might do them some good, it might not, but my needs transcend the awe and adoration of a bunch of filthy apes. Yet here you are burning up precious weeks and months of your immortality for some half-witted joke upon me. Perhaps you could explain that in terms a filthy ape might understand. Oh, great and powerful Bosie. Bosie laughed and swung around in his throne so that his legs hung over one arm. He smiled complacently. You're terrific, Johannes Cabal. You know that. Just about anybody else would be whimpering in the corner by this point with a serenity in his hands, not least because I would have got bored with them and gone out of my way to blow their wits out of their ears. You, though, I'm talking to you because I'm the messenger of the gods, and that makes me the great communicator. I am the only one who has any interest in humanity at all. The others occasionally turn up and blunder around a while, but if they even can perceive humans, they usually regard them as a bit creepy and exterminate them. Cabal tried to imagine dread Cthulhu rising from the corpse city of Arlier, seeing humans and squealing like a housefrau who discovers mice in the pantry before pounding them to death with a broom. Then again, perhaps Cthulhu did squeal, but in a form and context unimaginable to the human mind or imperceptible to human senses. It hardly mattered if it were true. Cthulhu could still eradicate all life on Earth, whether he was squealing like an enormous trans-dimensional schoolgirl or not. But know this, Johannes Cabal, you have a small part in a grand plan, and whatever you decide to do, it is destined. Fall on your sword or live until you're 90, whatever you do for us. And that is all you need to know. To be honest, it is all you're capable of understanding. And there was a short, awkward silence. And the phobic animus? That? Oh, there isn't one. Not in the convenient package that the Fear Institute believed. No, irrational fear is always where everybody thought it was, sweating away in the human heart. Once I became aware of their brave little project, though, well, it was so inconvenient to my plans, I just couldn't resist. I recovered the silver key from its last owner. That was Hepseth, incidentally, and you were right. He is at the bottom of the crevasse. And then inveigled it to the hands of the Fear Institute. And sent them to me, finished Cabal. I shan't bother asking why. You'll only get all mystical. Reasons and reasons. But you might understand one. Bosie looked steadily at him, and Cabal thought he caught the scent of brimstone. This thought experiment of yours, he said slowly, just how hypothetical. I told you we weren't done at the time, Johannes Cabal, said Bosie, but his voice was not his own. Cabal swallowed very carefully. So, he said tonelessly, what now? What now? Bosie's voice was still of the pit, flaming and dangerous. Suddenly he smiled and sat up. How would you like your heart's desire? As Johannes Cabal gathered himself up from the grass, he wondered just how many times he was likely to be translocated around assorted planes of existence in his lifetime. He looked around as he dusted himself off, peeved but unsurprised that the phobic animus, or Nyarlathotep, or Gardner Bosie Esquire, or whatever else he might be styling itself this week, had not allowed him to keep his bag. The loss of Recusides he could manfully bear, but the loss of his notebook, files of reagent, his death's head cane, and worst of all, the silver key, were nuisances great and small. He was wondering how likely recovering them might be when a large crow settled on a nearby boulder, eyed him with a mercenary glee, and croaked loudly, "Cronk!" Cabal almost groaned with rancor and disappointment. He recognized the crow, he recognized the rock on which it was perched, he knew exactly where he was, and he knew that his bag and its contents were lost beyond any reasonable chance of recovery. It was very annoying, but there was nothing to be done about it, so he put them aside in the vast mental jumble room he kept for memories of abject failure, and set his face toward a new day. He was nothing if not a pragmatist. He allowed the crow to perch on his shoulder as he walked along. The last time he had been coming this way, it had been to meet Messrs. Shadrach Court and Nyarlathotep at the pub in the village. How long ago it seemed. Now they were all dead or alive in some metaphysical way that he doubted was expressible to poor creatures like himself, whom the gods would destroy, the ancients tell us, they first make mad. Cabal often wondered why they would bother destroying anybody whose sanity they had already shattered. It seemed petty, but then that was God's for you. The house was just as it always was, bleak, solitary, and with a perilous front garden. He went on up the path, ignoring the tiny eyes that watched him from within the shrubs and beneath the ivy, unlocked the door, hardly necessary, but old habits die hard, and let himself in. And there, in his front hall with the black and white tiled floor, he stopped and stared in utter astonishment at what lay before him. For there, just by the mat, was an envelope. It made not a halfpenny of sense. He collected his post, what little there was of it, poste restante, from the post office in the village, both because he didn't care to have more people than necessary coming to his house, and because the post officer did not enjoy having its postmen eaten by the recalcitrant fairies and the other little folk of Cabal's front garden. For a while he had trained the garden folk to acknowledge a list of people they should let by, which included the postman, but the training required constant refreshing, as the gossamer-winged little proponents of chaos tended to forget it at the first hunger pang. Then there had been a moderately ingenious attempt to kill him by the disgruntled relative of somebody or another that he dug up for research material. They had dressed as a postman and actually made it into his house before becoming research material themselves. It was all too distracting. So he had made a poste restante arrangement, and everybody was about as happy about it as they were likely to be. The envelope had not therefore been delivered by a postman or anybody else who might reasonably be considered edible to tiny mouths full of very sharp, tiny teeth. He looked suspiciously at the crisp white envelope for a second longer before reopening the door and calling into the front garden, "Who has been to the house?" "Nobody," came a plaintive chorus of small voices. "We're ever so hungry, Johannes Cabal." Cabal grunted dismissively and went back indoors. The garden folk were lousy liars, and on this occasion they seemed to be telling the truth. He crouched by the envelope and tried to see if there was anything obviously dubious about it, such as razors or the faint shimmer of a dried contact poison, but he could see nothing. Finally, picking it up gingerly between finger and thumb, protecting his skin with a handkerchief, he took it up into his attic laboratory. The letter remained inscrutable to close observation under lens and ultraviolet light. Finally, wearing his heaviest rubber gauntlets and an army surplus gas mask, Cabal opened the envelope with his favorite Swan & Morton No. 22 scalpel, being careful to cut the paper at the opposite end from the flap. Inside, he saw nothing more malevolent than a folded sheet of foolscap parchment, which he removed with tweezers and opened gently for fear of triggering some trap so subtle as to baffle conventional physics and, indeed, common sense. But then, as Cabal knew full well, nobody ever died from being too careful. Well, apart from that man who suffocated in cotton wool, but he was an idiot. The sheet of parchment was, however, looking much like a sheet of parchment at present. That wasn't to say it was harmless. There are certain runic patterns that can draw the attention of unwelcome supernatural attention on whoever has the misfortune to look upon them, so Cabal continued to be delicately cautious long after the point when he had disproved the possibility of every form of magical trap known, and several more open to conjecture. Finally, even after he had conceded that the letter was merely a letter, though it bore no name and address and had somehow been posted without the knowledge of his front garden, he still felt misgivings as he opened it fully and studied its contents. At first, he thought he must be mistaken. Surely it was only a similarity in cursive styles, but as he read the short note of little more than 100 words that began with no greeting and ended with no signature, he recognized nuances in phrasing and came to the inescapable conclusion that it had been written by himself. He had no memory of ever doing so, however, and the content was of such startling originality that he knew he never had. He tore off the gas mask and gauntlets and read it again, and then again. It was ingenious. It was radical, and he knew in his heart that it was effective. What had Nyarlathotep said as he mooched around on his throne in the form of the inoffensive Herr Bosie? How would you like your heart's desire? The note contained the basic principle for perfect resurrection, the secret of raising the dead just as they had been when they were alive, physically, mentally, spiritually. Cabal took down his laboratory logbook from the shelf and opened it to a fresh page. All the experiments previously, all those years of work, were now as dross to him. Now he could see the beginning of the true path to his goal. He hung up his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. There was still much to be done, but now he knew what he knew. The fire burned in him again. This time, he would succeed. One day, perhaps not so very far away. Depending on where his researches led him, she would rise again, and she would see and speak and think, and Cabal would feel happiness for the first time in so long. He paused, angrily wiped at his eyes with the heel of his hand. He was shaking. He had no time for this, he told himself. No time. There was so very much to be done. It was true. There was a very great deal to be done. The note, which Cabal painstakingly transcribed into 3 different notebooks for fear that it might vanish as mysteriously as it had appeared, was only a beginning, an inspiration to explore some principles that might have been disregarded indefinitely without the note pointing out a subtlety to their applications that opened vast new vistas of fruitful research. But the note was short and of no help beyond putting him on the right path. Most researches were necessary, more experiments, which meant more danger. Now, however, he knew the perils were worth it. No more stealing obscure books at great personal risk when he knew they would lead only to dead ends. No more canoodling with demons for scraps of dubious information. Cabal did wonder, though, if Bosie had been telling the truth in his little thought experiment. And he was also Satan, and Satan was therefore not a fallen angel, but just another face of a trickster god. It's, as Tezcatlipoca, Loki, and Anansi must also be. What were the demons of hell in reality? It was an intractable problem. There was only one sure way of knowing, and that would involve communicating with Nyarlathotep, who would likely be in neither such a jovial frame of mind, nor form should they ever meet again. Cabal's best guess was that the demons in that case would be constructs, or creatures corrupted so thoroughly that they were no longer aware of ever having been anything but demons. It would be the final humiliation, and the eternal suffering of the damned in hell was simply stage dressing. Ultimately, however, it was irrelevant to his current researches, and he considered those hapless multitudes only for a moment before moving on. Early experiments were encouraging, and as Cabal's confidence in his new direction grew, so did his intolerance of distractions. He purchased a new Webley 577 and a replacement for a sword cane. Soon, he was using both. A 17th century painting of the theologian Johannes Valentinus André included a scrap of paper carelessly thrown on his desk that contained a complex diagram showing of the relationship between certain esoteric humors. Cabal went to his private house where it hung and cut it from the canvas with a sword cane. When the owner attempted to stop him, Cabal shot him dead with the Webley. Then there was a time a year later when Cabal was cornered by armed police in the chemical engineering building of the university. He escaped by converting a fractional distillation column of the size of a 3-story house into an impromptu explosive device and hiding behind a very concrete wall when it detonated. A dozen bystanders were injured, 3 fatally, and 4 university buildings burned down. But Cabal escaped with the materials he had sought, and so that was of no import. 3 years after that, it was necessary to relieve some inbreed, a member of the aristocracy, which is to say much the same thing, of a gem recovered from a meteorite 400 years previously. It comprised the centerpiece of a tiara that left a vault only for very important occasions, and Cabal waited impatiently for such an occasion to arise. Finally, a benefit dinner for some worthy cause. Cabal thought it might involve orphans, but he was not overly interested. Was announced at which some dowager somebody of somewhere would be wearing the tiara. The next morning, the newspapers were agape at the mass murder of everybody at the dinner through the agency of poisonous gas. Some days later, during the investigation, the tiara was recovered from under a side table where it had been carelessly thrown. The central gem was no longer in its setting. And so it went on, an outrage here, an atrocity there, punctuating the onward and upward progress of Johannes Cabal the necromancer. His path was clear, and if anyone ventured upon it and became an obstruction, they were removed as quickly and economically as swatting a fly. Where Cabal walked, he left gravestones and woe. Yet he did not care, and he did not pause. Where once he had killed with at least an iota of regret in aiding his ultimate foe, death, now he murdered easily and without hesitation. For the first time in his life, he was buying new 50-round boxes of ammunition annually. He was on his 3rd new sword cane, the first having been lost during an escape, and the second's blade having snapped in the ribs of a museum guard. Sometimes, when he looked at himself in the mirror, Johannes Cabal saw his ultimate foe right there, looking back at him. He shrugged inwardly and carried on shaving. None of that mattered, he knew. None of those people mattered. He had a plan, and it was more important than anything else in the world. Nor were his crimes limited to the mundane world. He summoned the demon, Lucifuge Raphael, for the 2nd time in his life, and as the demon was halfway through saying, "Oh, it's you again. Have you got your dread rod with you this time?" Cabal shot him through the head with a bullet made from the metal of Lang, sanctified on a lonely beach by Dagon himself, who had no love for demons. Lucifuge looked surprised, then dead, and Cabal hung him by his feet from a nearby tree for his blood to drain into a bucket. He left the demon dangling upside down, the last droplets of his black blood tainting the soil. The carrion crows gathered around, but none cared to sample that particular dish. Satan did not turn up that night, all in a bait because Cabal had killed one of his. Cabal hardly expected him to, because in his mind's eye he could see Satan, sitting in his great basalt throne by a burning lake of lava, and in some lights he looked just like Mr. Gardner Bosey. The wall of Cabal's laboratory contained a cork-lined notice board, and upon this were pinned yellowed newspaper cuttings and opening museum exhibitions and forthcoming benefit dinners, carefully drawn alchemical charts and formula of unusual chemical equations. And there in the center of them all was a sheet of parchment upon which was written a short paragraph in his own handwriting. It never yellowed or faded. The path was clear, but it was also long. His experiments were not always successes, but the triumphs became more remarkable and more frequent as he closed in on his ultimate goal. He resurrected animals, first fish, frogs, insects, and reptiles, and then mammals. He brought a cat back to life that seemed so delighted to be dead no longer that it positively tap danced. A dog followed, but turned out to be an ill-tempered and poorly trained animal that had deserved its premature death, so Cabal was forced to repeat the experience for it, this time with no hope of reprieve. Now there was a final test to make. It seemed advantageous to recreate a certain set of circumstances, so he traveled to the city and made the acquaintance of a woman in her late teens whose time was for sale. And when they were comfortably sequestered in a discreet hotel of a certain sort, he drowned her in the bath. He then conveyed her away in a large trunk he had waiting for precisely this purpose, by train and hired cart, and so to his house and laboratory. Here he applied his newly developed procedures and processes, which involved an extraterrestrial crystal, the blood of a demon, and a great deal of new research hitherto unguessed at in esoteric fields of necromancy. 3 hours and 50 minutes later, the young woman was sitting on an old sofa in Cabal's front room, shivering, with a blanket around her shoulders as she drank a cup of SMT Cabal had made her. He spun her some story about her collapsing and how in a panic he had brought her away. She couldn't remember any of the unpleasantness in the bathroom and barely remembered meeting Cabal in the first place. He insisted that she stay the night, ostensibly because it was already the evening and the railway station was a long way away, but actually to observe her. She behaved much as any startled young woman might, and responded within norms when he lied to her about being a doctor, and carried out some tests on mental and physical function. Among these, he sprinkled in a few to make sure that her spirit had not been corrupted or supplanted in the process, dripping holy water and garlic essence on her tongue under the pretense that it was a neural test to check that her senses of taste and smell were still working. She reported that the water tasted like water and the garlic essence tasted like garlic, and Cabal observed that at no point did her tongue burst into flames or her head explode, both of which would have constituted negative indicators. She behaved normally throughout, slept normally on the sofa, and at no point during the night was observed to fly around the house with her eyes glowing or decide at breakfast that what she really wanted to eat was a nice plate of human brains. He drove her to the second closest railway station by a circuitous route and pressed a generous sum of money into her hand for her expenses, the inconvenience, and for being an excellent test subject, although he didn't actually mention that last point. He was breaking his original plan by letting a potential witness go. The rational thing to do would have been to kill her again, saw her up again, and get rid of the evidence in the house's furnace, but he was tired of death. He had never enjoyed killing, except in a few well-deserved cases. Yet this time, as a necromancer was drawing to a close, and he did not regret it. He did regret, irrationally and momentarily, that he had failed to preserve Miss Smith in any sort of form useful for resurrection, now that the secret was in his grasp. Then again, the good turn she had done him had been after her death and dissection, and he truly doubted that he could bring life back to the few bits of her that still existed, bobbing about in formaldehyde. Besides, she seemed happy in her post-mortem career as the Witch of Loneth Necropolis. Attempting to cram her spirit into a few bits of pickled offal would likely irritate her. It took him a fortnight to gather the nerve to break the seals on the glass coffin. There it had lain all these years, concealed beneath the floor of his hidden second laboratory in the cellar. A secret within a secret. He spent the 2 weeks planning and preparing again and again, assuring himself that this was not procrastination, not fear, but solid, sensible forethought. There reached a point where such rationalization ceased to convince even himself, however, and so, early one clear Friday morning, and after a good breakfast, eaten slowly, he went down the cellar steps. He walked reluctantly, as if going to his own execution rather than to the sum of all of his ambitions. He knew that there could only be one attempt, and that if he failed forever. His step wavered as he considered going to the city and carrying out his previous experiment again. After all, one can have confidence in one's results only if they can be consistently repeated. It was a lie to himself, though, and he had always been good at telling when he was lying. He continued his descent. Once he was committed, he did not hesitate. The seals were broken quickly, for once the first was opened, the conditions within the glass coffin, filled to the brink with a fluid of occult formulation, altered, and its contents were no longer held outside time and from corruption. The coffin was a large structure, almost filling the 4 by 8 foot hole it occupied beneath the laboratory floor. Between the thick glass and the great weight of liquid it contained, there had never been any intention of removing it. Indeed, even shifting the lid required the use of the same winch he had employed to lift the false floor slabs that concealed the coffin in its pit. It was a struggle to lift her from the coffin, and he feared his plan might founder on this slightest of details. He had already lost almost a minute when he reached in and took her arm by the wrist. He had not touched her in so long, and for that minute he was so overcome and could hardly breathe for the slow pulse of guilt and sorrow that he managed to lock away for all those years. Time was wasting, though, and so he carried out the procedures and the processes, the apex of necromantic science, the final Catholicon, a cure for death. 3 hours and 50 minutes it took, just as with the woman from the city, and it succeeded perfectly, just as with the woman from the city. She was shaking from the reaction, so he coddled her in a warm blanket, made her tea, and she thanked him for his kindness, and asked where everybody else was, and how far downriver had she been swept away before the kind gentleman had saved her. Cabal had been ready for anything. Ready for any possibility, or so he thought. He knelt by her, took her hand in his, and said her name, and then he said, "It is me, Johannes, your Johannes." Then her eyes widened with recognition, and she reached out to touch his hair, which had once been blonde, but was now gray. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, her voice breaking. She was stronger than him in so many ways. Everything she had known had faded away in the decades she had lain dead in her fairy tale coffin. Only Johannes Cabal was left, but now he was old, and somewhere along the way, he had died too. The man she saw was not the man she loved. She consigned that man away into her lost years. This Johannes Cabal was kind, but just now and then something he said or something he did betrayed an inner desperation she pitied, and sometimes a heartlessness grown habitual that she despised. She was kind to Johannes Cabal, which pained him, and he could feel her pity towards him. Thus it was no surprise to either of them, not really, when one day he walked her to the railway station and put a bag containing all the wealth and paper and gold he could gather together in her hand. and sent her to the city. He left her there before she might try to kiss him. It would have been the kiss one gives an elderly relative one is moderately fond of, and it would have crushed his heart where he stood. He left her on the platform as the train approached, and he did not look back. In his house, in the attic laboratory, he sat on his workbench and looked at the notice board upon which was still pinned that strange piece of parchment. He felt nothing. Not anymore. In the cellar, the furnace burned fiercely as it consumed his notebooks, a lifetime flaming into light and smoke. He had made some adjustments to the boiler valves, and soon there would be a catastrophic explosion that would be heard from the village. He had little doubt there would be celebrations there that evening. Let them have their fun. He wouldn't even be alive to be taken by the explosion. On the workbench before him lay his Webley Boxer 577. Freshly cleaned and tested. It wouldn't do for it to fail now. He took it up, enjoying its weight for the last time, placed the muzzle in his mouth, and fired. And that's the end of chapter 14. Yes. Yeah, I know. I will go ahead and let you know now. Maybe I should have mentioned this beforehand. The next book, the main character isn't Johannes. This isn't. I can't tell you. You'll find out. I don't think you'll be disappointed if it's any consolation. Let me see if I have it. Well, how about, as consolation, I tell you the title of the fourth one? Did I ever tell you the title of the fourth one? Maybe that'll help. Oh, I'm not crying. My contacts won't fall. Do I have it over here? I do not. Let me see. see if I can find it. Where'd she go? Well, the book jacket is missing, but maybe this will help. The fourth one is called The Brothers Cabal. And I feel like you'll like it. Horst, yeah. Horst is in the fourth one. Your boy does appear in the fourth one. So hopefully that will help you get through the remainder of this one, because the Fear Institute isn't even over. It's not even over. Now, yeah, I'm okay. This is sort of the end of a period of time. We're almost getting to the end of Fear Institute, and my favorite part is actually coming up. Oh man, you missed a lot, Nightshade. Now, the thing is, this one we have two options. And I'll let you know what the options are. One, we can vote. One, there's 3 chapters left. It goes to 17 in this book. So, would you like to read chapter 15 now, and 16 and 17 next week, and then we take the 3 remaining short stories and disperse them into 2 for one live and 1 with its own live? Or my original plan was to read 15 and 16 next week, and then read 17 and The Death of Me, which is the shortest short story, next week. And then split up the other 2 short stories accordingly. Which would you prefer? Okay, we have one vote for now. Original plan? Okay, we have 1 for each. 4, 5 for original. All right. Okay. Original it is. I like the way this book is laid out. And I like the next one too. it's difficult to say. This is where the series sort of gets, and I don't want you to get the wrong idea, because in content it is nothing like it, but the layout is like it. Oh, thank you for the pride flag. This is where the layout gets sort of Game of Thrones-y. And what I mean by this is halfway through Game of Thrones, it was like George R. R. Martin was like, okay, these two books are going to be published separately, but they're going on at the same time. This book, next book, is occurring concurrently with Fear Institute. Part of it. Partially. Sort of. The time overlaps a little bit. Yeah. And the fifth book is split in half. Half of it is one group, and the other half is the other group. And you haven't even met all the characters of the D&D party that the setup is for in the fifth book. You don't even know all the characters yet. So this is where things start branching off and splintering in a manner of ways. You'll sort of be able to reframe it in your mind after we've read it. And you'll be like, oh, I kind of get what that means. But right now, it's going to sound real weird. Yeah, I didn't want to leave you on a really sour note today, because this was a really depressing chapter. But this isn't the end. It's not. We still have 2 of the books. So it's not the end. I don't want you to think that. But I do want you to be prepared for the weird. It's not even just chaos after this book. It is, but it's also just weird. It just gets weird. Yeah, I was like, I'm going to get to this cliffhanger and someone is going to be like, how dare you not make this live a little bit longer? Because chapter 15 isn't that long. But I originally set it up to where I could squeeze Death of Me in there somewhere. Because I didn't want to leave it out. It's still part of the series. In fact, we should have read it before this book. And I forgot that it had an impact on this one. And it doesn't have much of an impact. You're not missing much. But you'll see why. Like, the whole sequence about the tarot card is from Death of Me. Where he's thinking about, like, he'd be really surprised if he drew any of the other cards. That is from Death of Me. And we'll get there. We'll just remember that came before this. But we missed Death of Me because we did some of the other short stories. Because there's a lot of short stories. And we still haven't worked our way through even the most important one. We still have the most important one, and I planned it specifically so we would read it right before. So we would have a little bit more stuff where Johannes is the main character, right before the next one. If that makes sense. Because it's gonna be, how do I put this? It's sort of like a flashback. Like, most of the next book is a frame story in which you're looking in a flashback. And so I know that might be mildly upsetting for some people to, like, some people hate frame stories. And I don't want you all to be let down. I want you to have full expectations of what you're walking into. Hi, Pond. Hello. Yes. Yes. Hello, good kitten. Uh-huh. Don't lick my face, please. There's paint all over it. So, yeah, I didn't want you to have any regrets. Sleeve? Am I getting the sleeve? Let's get in the sleeve. Yeah, get in the sleeve. Alright, good. Yes, good. Yeah. You want to say hi to your adoring public? Yeah. Everybody loves you. They want you for president, even. Aww. She's rubbing the microphone. Aw, she loves you guys. Oh. She's gonna pop this off. Ow! That's pawn purse for you to feel better. But yeah, I was really worried about the outcome. And I hope I don't really know how to describe it. But there's a reason Fear Institute is my favorite. It's different from all the others. Because you also have to realize that in this world, time and space are all subjective, and so is reality. So not only, and chaos theory is very much alive and well. So anything that happens in the dreamlands, there are infinite possibilities of how it could and could not have gone. Yeah, I know the door is open. Pawn shoved open the door. Pawn, you want to close the door since you opened it? No? She's laid down, so I'm taking that to mean no. So, I'm sorry. I can get up and close it if it's distracting you all. Do you want me to get up and close it? Because I will. I just have to dislocate this cat. Oh. Right as I said that, she got more comfortable, and I was like, oh no. Yeah, hi. That's what. Okay. Fuck was that? Yeah, I was like, I don't know if I can do that. Normally, if it's just me in here, I'll get up and close it. But if Pawn's on me and comfortable, I don't want to move you. Are you gonna get up? Do you want to go on the pillow? Is the pillow more comfortable? That's okay, then I can close the door. Oh, that is my arm. Never mind, she just relocated to on top of my arm. Did you hear that? It was super weird, wasn't it? That noise? Did you hear that weird wind against my window? Super creepy. Anyway, but I really hope you like the next two books because they're structured a little differently. Yeah, I don't know. It was like sometimes the wind on the windows in here sounds super crazy, and I'm not sure. Like, I'll like be the only one up, and I'll know it, and I'll hear that weird like wind pressure on the window, but it sounds like a ghost house, and I'm like, I don't live in a ghost house. Super creepy for no reason. House is extra as hell. Anyway, but sometimes it happens in here, and I'm just like, ghost? So, maybe it's because I've been saying Nyarlathotep so much. No. But I hope you're not too disappointed, because at this point the book sort of shifts in tone, and not everybody who has read it has liked it. So I like it, but that's just me. And now I'm nervous because at least I'm reasonably sure people are going to be amused with the first 2.75 of the books. And then at some point, they're like, oh, why didn't see... It's pretty different, but the relationships between people change. Trust me, you're gonna feel even worse for him. It's not gonna end well. It's not gonna end well. Both now and later. I'll tell you right now, this series, not the book, this is me warning you, this series does not have a happy ending. It doesn't even have a satisfying ending. And I want you all to know that now, because if you want to bow out after Fear Institute, I completely understand. I'm legit anxious about it. Like, I was anxious about this chapter, and I'm anxious for the rest of the book, and then I'm anxious how you all take the rest of the series. Because depending on how you feel about some of the characters, you might be very upset. Like, you're committed now. It's not even... The thing is, it's not even angst. At least on a certain level, I think people can understand angst. Angst is a human condition. Angst is quantifiable. We can still relate to it. Even though it makes us disappointed, it still is something quantifiable. We feel sad. We know we're supposed to feel sad. We can get up after we're done reading and move on with the rest of the day. What I think people have a harder time dealing with is ambivalence. It's not great. It's not good. It's not bad. It just is. It just is. It's just there. And you either accept it or you don't. But when stuff just sort of ends on a question mark, well, just kind of makes you feel a little lost. Anyway, I hope you'll still join me. I hope everybody who's very confused about this turn of events or has theories on what you think is going to happen or what have you, if you want to send me, if you want to send me your best eulogy, I mean, really think about it. Give me your best eulogy. You can send that to P.O. Box 96. No, you can DM me on Instagram. You can tag me on TikTok. You can tell me in the redacted area, which I have to repost in the bio. But if you want to send me your best eulogy, and as always, cat videos, cat pictures, Minecraft cats, accepted. Anything with cats, send me the cats. I love the cats. You know that. Send me all of that. I want to see your best eulogy. As someone who constantly rewrites everyone's eulogy every 3 months or so when I get kind of bummed, I want to see your best effort here, guys. No joke eulogy. Well, you can make it a joke if you really want to. If you deflect with humor, go ahead. I want to see your best eulogies. Make me cry. Make these contacts fall out. I want to see your best effort. Why is this what this TikTok has become? Thank you for joining me this week. I'm gonna go hop in VC for apparently some sort of demon night. It's gonna be a huge spectacle. We're gonna have a great time. I might read a short story. I'm not sure how everybody's gonna feel about that, but if you want to pick me up, I can read you a horror story. We might do Pickman's Model. That's one of my favorites. It makes me feel better. So, if you're joining us there, that sounds like a great idea. If you're going to see us next Tuesday at 8, even better. We do this every Tuesday, and I'm going to read the last, either the 15, 16, maybe 17 if we have time. Depends on the time. But, or I might just do it the original way since everybody voted the original way. Do 15, 16 next week, and then 17 and Death of Me, and then in their own little episode. We'll see how it goes. But I hope I get to see all of you next week. Hopefully nobody gets super mad and bails. Anyway, but everybody seems to be doing pretty okay, and I think that's pretty rad. So I will see you all soon. I'm going to head out. And as always, thank you everybody who donated stuff or money. I really appreciate it. Crimson, Rose, maybe. Y'all are awesome sauce, and I really appreciate it. And I hope you all have a good night.